oppression, addictions, negative lifestyles. This is something that is very common and people can't see it. So for example, people talk about like the gay lifestyle, kind of hedonistic, this kind of like mentality of like a hedonistic type of lifestyle of excess, and they have this concept of it being as in like hedonistic type of thing. I don't think so. I think this is kind of very much a staple amongst anybody, any group of people who are oppressed. So poverty is an example of oppression. Sometimes poverty due to things like nature, can lead to a level of addictions and negativity of different sorts within a culture. In a lot of places where they don't have the natural resources to sell or thrive, people tend to be poor. People tend to be engaged in more things like prostitution, drug use, and whatnot. If you look at peoples within a society, like I would say, for example, with First Nations people in Canada, I won't deny that there are drug issues, alcoholism, numerous different types of issues within First Nation society in Canada, but part of the reason why that exists is due to oppression, right? It's just like if you don't have room to thrive, you don't. It doesn't apply to just one person, but multiple people. Where you have room to thrive, for example, being in juxtaposition. The UK was in a good juxtaposition, on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, on the very edge of Europe. Sort of like, I understand the UK is a country, but also serves as a bit of a port, into Europe or out of Europe, right? And then you have the easterly or westerly trade winds. I can't remember which way the trade winds blow, but the trade winds blow in a favorable direction, so that travel from the UK to, say, Canada, the US, South America, places like that, was beneficial. And you look at UK people, for example, like English people, they are maybe akin to like Filipinos. Filipinos are, as a result of numerous different waves of invasions, amalgamating into a different culture, and the English are very much like that, all the way from the Romans, Visigoths, Gauls, you name it, Germans, French, right? It's the UK is kind of a melting pot of European culture. Even the language is a pidgin language, and it represents that to a large degree. But the UK, had the opportunity to move much further past where they were in, and all they needed was a necessity like a lack of natural resources to necessitate thriving even more. And so when you look at somebody who's like trans people, for example, you look at trans people and you see trans people who are drug addicts. You see trans people who have horrible addictions, or have, horrible mental health, or have psychotic issues, and stuff like that along those lines. You have to stop and consider, like, maybe this is simply due to oppression. It's like Dave Chappelle says, this is a funny position to be in. This is humorous. You were born into a body that you don't think you were born into. Right? How do you explain that? Not very well. Right? That doesn't mean that it's not real and it doesn't exist. But how do you justify this? How do you explain this? Right? How do you negate it? Right? It's a minority of people, but yet it's a minority of people that exist and have always existed. Right? No different than saying, like, gay or lesbian people have existed and always existed. Right? Or that it's somewhat an aspect of those type of people. A variant of a variant or something, right? You could look at someone like Tupac, Biggie Smalls, all the kind of gangster rappers and those sort of things, and that type of like genre of music, and everything all the negativity that's perceived as being a part of that, right? Drug abuse, like crunk. Crunk was a form of precursor or type of trap music, and crunk was named after a kind of cough syrup cocktail that people would get high off of, right? It's very street level type music or mentality, but it's very much like that. It's very much like, a lot of the time it's like a mentality. When you look at the kind of like 90s, early 2000s kind of like gangster rapper, thug type people, it was very much like, this is how you perceive me, right? Then I will take this and I will amplify it by 100 times, and I will shove it back in your face, right? Because the more that you fear me, I just grow bigger the more that you fear me, and it's level of power. I'm not going to tell you that. But like, and so the point being is that, like, when it comes to addictions, when you see people, struggling with addictions, a minority struggling with addictions, struggling with negativity, poor mental health, things along that line, right? A lot of the time, the person who lives in the majority, who has the upper hand, is often pointing the finger, looking at like, oh yeah, another one you type. They don't know that person. They don't know that culture, or those people, they don't understand where they come from. They don't understand why they are the way they are, and they just make blanket assumptions. It's very human and very normal to do that, but it's also, in of itself, just compiling oppression on top of oppression. Right? And if you think about a minority with a majority, where does that minority have room to grow? It doesn't. It doesn't have room to grow unless the majority allows it to. And so then what do you end up doing? Right? You end up doing what everyone and everything does. You turn in on yourself. It took me a long, long time to clue into that is why people are sometimes the way they are. When you look at them in a negative light, you know, and I'm not like trying to label people or propagate something. You know, I can just say it of myself and people like me, you know, from what I know, my experience, you know, and from talking to other people, is that like you, for example, you know, trans people have an internalized sense of self-hatred, right? That internalized sense of self-hatred, you know, is there, that's like, it's very much programmed into us, right? Like when I'm allowed to be myself, and I'm in an area where, you know, I can talk freely, and I can, you know, just be myself, right? Then I'm kind of like thriving. I'm happy, you know. It doesn't have anything to do with what medications I'm taking, or my childhood, or some sort of mental illness, you know, some sort of disorder or something along that line, right? You know, then I'm just in a happy bubble, and I'm kind of like thriving, and things are good, right? You subtract me from that and put me into a negative environment, right? You put me in an environment where I'm with like friends, and everyone's like not misgendering me, and, you know, understands what I'm going through and stuff like that. Subtract me from that and put me in another environment where the majority is clueless about who or what I am or what I'm going through, and they all have various different types of assumptions about who or what I am that completely snuffs out who or what I am, right? Then I'm not thriving. There's nowhere to go, right? It's not much different than like photosynthesis, right? Plants that have the ability to grow, to get enough sunlight and grow, do so and thrive. The ones that don't. You know, they can attempt to thrive in something like a shaded area, but they're not going to thrive the same as another plant that is in the right kind of Goldilocks position to thrive. And it's just often just due to just sheer conditions, just circumstances that are completely almost happenstance. And so that's how I look at it, right? When I see somebody who is portraying the negative, you know, cliche image that you would be thinking of that person, right? I don't see just that one moment in time, you know? And I don't make a blanket assumption that it is like this, you know? The patient came in, and because they're homeless and they're grubby and gruff and stuff like that, they're automatically a bad person. It's not like that. There's a long story going on behind all that, right? A long story that I don't know. Why are there so many trans people who wind up in hospital due to overdoses, right? Or attempted suicides? You know, and what happens to you when you get into that position where you get locked in to a psych ward and you get labeled as something, right? That's how it works. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you were contending with, right? It just means that somebody came along and intervened into the situation and decided to label the situation as this, or possibly that, you know? And it's too easy to, and it gets confusing too, because you'll see a lot of trans people who have borderline personality disorder, right? Which came first though? Was being trans? Was that came first? Or was the borderline personality came first? Because if the borderline personality comes first, then you can say, oh, it's logical that maybe you're just trying to garner attention, right? However, if you're trans first and the borderline personality came later, maybe borderline personality disorder isn't exactly a perfect depiction of what that person is contending with. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? Maybe it was just kind of a genetic time bomb that was just waiting for a moment. Or maybe it's not an accurate label. Maybe it's more like this person has endured this much, and now we perceive them as this, and they kind of fit that category, so we're going to put them in that category for all intents and purposes. Which makes sense until we throw medication into the situation. I'm so bloated, I've been eating antacids all day. Oof.